I don't know if any of you caught any of the Final Four basketball games last night. An exciting one got Houston in the championship game coming up. And most of us are aware, though, that March Madness was happening, that this NCAA basketball tournament was going on, at least when it was March. And I know this year our local teams kind of let us down, and so maybe we haven't been following along as closely as usual. But we knew it was March Madness, and this basketball tournament is going on. There were other NCAA championships that were taking place in March as well, though, maybe some that we're less familiar with. Just a few weeks ago, the NCAA wrestling championships happened, so this madness was going on. It was an exciting competition. One young man won a national championship for the 5th year in a row. I'm a preacher, so 4 years of college and 5 national championships. Some really amazing things, thanks to some weird COVID rules and other things that are going on. But that was sort of fun. An exciting heavyweight championship. Underdog came through and won that wrestling championship. Many of us weren't aware that this madness, this wrestling championship was happening. I didn't grow up participating in wrestling. I didn't wrestle in high school or anything, but my son got involved many years ago when he was in middle school and high school, and he wrestled. And so I would go to these events, and I was learning the sport. And so I would sit in the stands very much as a non-participant. Maybe that's one of the reasons he really enjoyed it, because Dad didn't have anything to, try this, son. I didn't have anything to offer him or to say, and so perhaps that's why he really got into it. But he loved wrestling, and I learned the sport a little bit, and I enjoyed it more and more. And I was just always amazed, because while I was very much a non-participant, I didn't know what to say or when to say it or any of those things. Nobody coaches from the stands like wrestling parents. They have so much encouragement that they want to get out, so many instructions, all those things. And I was especially fascinated by wrestling moms, because to be honest, there's this transformation that takes place with a wrestling mom. One minute, this mom will be, "Oh, Johnny, let me peel this orange slice because you need a little nourishment, but I don't want to trouble you with peeling your own orange slice. Let me do this for you." To when Johnny steps onto the mat, "Johnny, shove his face into the mat!" This transformation that takes place with wrestling moms is really phenomenal and sort of encouraging. That was my favorite. I heard that encouragement more than once: shove his face into the mat. And so I love that. And there's truly this transformation. And I don't know if you really need that kind of transformation when you're watching wrestling or some other sporting event or a concert or whatever. But I do know that as we're walking through life as followers of Jesus, man, we need to experience transformation, if for no other reason. Did you know that in the New Testament, when the New Testament talks about spiritual warfare, it uses the language of wrestling? That while I think sometimes we think of spiritual warfare sort of like an airstrike. You go in and you drop some bombs and then you're home for dinner, and it's something that happens far away. The New Testament talks about spiritual warfare as hand-to-hand combat, as this personal confrontation. And we have to experience transformation if we're going to be doing hand-to-hand combat. There's an amazing story in Mark chapter 5. And it just catches us up a little bit. Casey, he did a wonderful job of sharing that story of Jesus. And I don't know if Jesus was tired. He'd been teaching and preaching kind of this marathon session. And we get the longest section, I think, in the Gospel of Mark of parables. There's not many of these. But this chunk of time where Jesus was teaching parables. And maybe he was tired because people weren't getting it. They struggled to understand, and he'd have to explain even the meaning of the parables to his disciples. And so maybe he was worn out from that. Maybe he was worn out from the length of the teaching process. Maybe he just wanted to get some other time. I think he went across this lake on purpose, and we'll get to that in a minute. But Jesus says to his disciples, we're getting into the boat, and they set sail, and they're taking off across the Sea of Galilee. It would typically take 2.5 to 3 hours. I like to say it was a 3-hour tour across the Sea of Galilee to get to the other side. And depending on the weather. And of course, what happens, Casey told us, is that this huge storm comes up, and the disciples are scared. They've never experienced that big a storm, maybe, and they're really concerned because Jesus is sleeping in the front of the boat, and they wake him up, and don't you care, Jesus? And what does Jesus do? Stop. And the winds and the waves, they stop. The storm ceases. Man, what a shock. And I just wonder at what point, maybe because of the storm, scholars think that trip maybe took 5 or 6 hours. And at what point does Jesus calm that storm? Because the rest of the trip had to be sort of awkward, didn't it? I mean, they're saying, who is this guy that the winds and waves obey him? And I just like to imagine Jesus going back to the front of the boat and at least pretending to lay his head down to take a nap again, thinking, you guys haven't seen anything yet. Because no matter the length of the journey that was left, as soon as they got to the other side, as soon as Jesus stepped out of the boat, I think they heard him before they saw him. And I wonder, what did they hear first? Maybe it was the clanging of chains that was left on his hands, wrists, and ankles as he ran towards Jesus. Or perhaps just the thump, thump, thump of his feet on the beach, coming down from that cliff. Maybe he was screaming the entire way. We know that when he got close to Jesus, he fell down, screaming, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Because Jesus was already calling out of that man the evil spirits that consumed him. And it's at that point that Jesus leans down and he looks into the man's eyes. Have you ever had somebody look into your eyes and they don't want to just make eye contact, but they are looking into your eyes like they're trying to get past whatever is hindering the conversation. Like they're trying to look into your soul. And I imagine that's what Jesus is doing, because I think he was trying to talk to the man, and the response he gets is from the demons. "What's your name?" "Legion, for we are many." And the demons beg Jesus, "Don't end our time here. Don't send us far out of the country. Why don't you let us go into those pigs?" And so Jesus does. And those demons consume the pigs, and they run. The demons run that herd of pigs over the cliff, plummeting to their death. The livelihood of the town just over the side of the cliff. Man, whoever was in charge of those pigs, they go back to town. They knock on the door. I imagine it's midnight, 1 in the morning. That's the time frame we're talking about. Have you ever received a knock at the door at 1 in the morning? That is typically not good news, and that's how the townspeople receive it. Your pigs are dead. You've got to come check this out. Not only are the pigs dead, but the guy we tried to chain up last week who broke those chains and was running around naked, that guy is in his right mind. And so the townspeople come out, and when they get to Jesus, they see what has occurred. They see the pigs on the other side of the cliff, in the sea, on the beach, whatever, dead. All that work, their livelihood gone. And they see this man that they'd chained up, that they had sent out of town, that his family has rejected him, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed for the first time in, I don't know, weeks, months, years, maybe in the very cloak of Jesus. And they are overcome, the townspeople, with fear. They don't know what to do. And so they look at this Jesus who they hold accountable for all of this, and they say, "Jesus, you've got to go." And he gets in the boat and starts on his way. And the man who has been healed, it's not hard for us to think, oh, he wants to go with Jesus. For whatever reason, though, Jesus says, I need you to stay. I need you to go back and tell your friends, your family. Tell them the good things that God has done for you. Tell them the mercy that God has had on you. And so that man goes back and he tells a story, and Jesus heads out the other way. This guy totally and completely transformed. Just like in Mark chapter 5, Jesus is still totally and completely transforming today. Jesus totally and completely transforms. This amazing story in Mark chapter 5, I think there are 4 truths that are taught as we work our way through the first 20 verses here in Mark chapter 5. We're going to read the scripture kind of as we work our way through these truths. Truth number 1 is that Jesus will meet you where you are. They came, and this is verse 1 in chapter 5, they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Among the tombs and in the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." An interesting start here as we think about truth number 1, that Jesus will meet you where you are. There's 2 words that I want us to kind of zero in on. The first one is immediately in verse 2. They came out to the other side of the sea in the country of the Gerasenes, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Mark loves the word immediately. As you read through the gospel, maybe in our reading plan heading up to Easter, you've seen this word over and over and over again. Somebody is always doing something immediately in the Gospel of Mark. I suppose the first place we find this word is in Mark chapter 1, about verses 9 to 10 there. It's the story of Jesus' baptism. And Jesus comes to John the Baptist, and they have this conversation. Jesus is baptized, and he's raised out of the water. And Mark says that immediately, as Jesus is raised out of the water, immediately the heavens are torn open. Now, this is the kind of scene in the New Testament that we sort of needlepoint onto pillows or whatever. We see artists rendering of this, and there's always like this beautiful sunbeam through a cloud and a peaceful dove descending, and it looks like just a wonderful Sunday afternoon picnic kind of setting. But that Greek word schizo is a word that means, well, torn apart, ripped open. And so I think it's much more of a sort of thunderstormish kind of scene, as there's this collision between the natural world and the spiritual world, that the Holy Spirit descends immediately, torn open. And it's that same kind of collision that we're reading about in Mark chapter 5, as Jesus lands on the other side, having demonstrated authority over the natural world. A little rain, a little wind, a few waves, cut it out. And he steps out of the boat, and now this man, overwhelmed by spiritual darkness, screaming and running, falling at his feet. The heavens torn open, ripped open once again. This guy, we get into this description of him in verses 3 through 5 here, and just think about it. He lived among the tombs. These are caves, folks. He lived out in the elements for weeks on end, months on end, maybe years on end. We don't really know. He'd often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, sort of this supernatural strength from the demons. He broke these chains over and over again. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. Beating himself, cutting himself with these stones over and over and over again. Why? Look, he broke those chains. It's not to break the chains. It's to escape the pain and the hurt and the turmoil that his life had come to. I think this guy over and over is trying to end his life just to get out of the pain. And then verse 6, this is the second word I want us to focus on. And when he saw Jesus from afar. I'm not really interested in that word. I circled it in my scripture journal here, and it's not so much because I want to know the physical distance that this guy ran, although when you're shaped like me, you're always interested in the physical distance that you might have to run. right? But that's not really what gets to me. It's this description of the man. Because I know there have been points in my life when I've thought, I don't know why Jesus would have anything to do with me. Right? The choices I've made, the decisions I've made, the places I've been, the stuff I've done. Maybe I'm at a point where this relationship is unraveling and I'm not sure where I'm going to go tomorrow or what I'm going to do. And I'm just like, wow, I can't be any farther away from God right now. But I circled that word afar because, who is farther away from God than this guy in the cemetery, naked, chained up, breaks the chains, can't be subdued by anyone, in complete and utter disaster of a life? You can't be farther away from Jesus. And yet I think Jesus went across that lake on purpose, and I really think he did. I think he wanted to be in the middle of the lake, in the middle of the storm, and to calm that storm for his disciples. And I think he wanted to be on the other side to meet this man possessed by demons that nobody else would talk to, nobody else could handle, nobody else could subdue. And Jesus will meet you exactly where you are. It's truth number one. Let's think about truth number two here, that the enemy's only goal is destruction. We get into this conversation that Jesus has, not really with the man, but with the demons. In verse 9, and Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man into the pigs. And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." This guy so far away from God, the demons are speaking for him. Jesus asks their name. The demons say Legion. A legion was a military group of soldiers in the Roman army, and it would have numbered anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 soldiers. Now, I don't know if there were, one demon or 5 demons. There were more than one. There were many. Whether it was 5 or 10 or 20 or 4,000, 6,000 demons. But it was enough that this guy's life was a disaster. He was in total spiritual darkness. And these demons say, "Our name's Legion," and then they say, "Don't send us far out of the country." What they're really saying here is, Luke gets a little closer to this. And when you read this story in Luke's gospel, in Luke chapter 6, the demons ask, "Don't send us to the abyss." You do a study of the word abyss, you kind of get to this point in the New Testament. That's the fiery pit. That's hell. They're like, "Don't send us to our eternal destiny." The demons are begging Jesus. They know that they are in a battle and a fight that they cannot win. They understand the hierarchy here. The first 10 is when the man throws himself at Jesus' feet and he says, I'm begging you, Jesus, Son of the God Most High. They understand they are punching above their weight limit. They can't win this fight. And so they're simply asking Jesus, don't send us to our eternal destiny. And for whatever reason, this is one of the decisions, this story is filled with them. This is one of the decisions that you can't quite, Jesus makes it because he's Jesus. And he allows these demons to go into the pigs. I don't know, there are 2,000 pigs. I don't know if there are 4,000 or 6,000 demons or less than that or more than that or whatever. I don't know if there was 1 demon per pig or 2 demons per pig. But it was enough that they just did what demons do. And they destroyed that herd of pigs. Boom, boom, boom. Just running over the cliff, killing all these pigs. All that wasted bacon on the other side of the cliff. Just utter destruction. So much so that the folks in charge of those pigs, they go back to town to tell the owners, you've got to come see this because your pigs are gone. Oh, by the way, that guy who we chained up last week, he seems to be doing better. I run out to meet Jesus, and they see just the destruction, total destruction. And that's what the enemy does. You might be saying, yeah, but it's different today, Lance. That kind of stuff, it doesn't happen today. Well, I think the answer is yes and no. I think as followers of Jesus, that the one who is in us, the Holy Spirit, who makes his home in us, is greater than he who is in the world. And we don't have to fear being in the position of this guy who was possessed by thousands of demons. But if you want to convince me that that spiritual battle is still not going on all around us, you're going to have to work harder than that. I've got a couple of goofy stories, and I don't want to take these too far because, look, this first story, I'm embarrassed to tell it because it really, I don't like to think of me as an old fat guy, and I know that's hard to imagine, but man, this really paints, I just deal with this old fat guy disease, gout. Sometimes I get gout, and my joints, it makes it really painful, and, but I don't like to admit that, and I read this biography about Martin Luther on vacation, and he also dealt with gout, so I like to think that we're basically the same. That was encouraging. But on vacation, I was heading home and I had a gout flare. And so I had some medicine. I took some medicine, and this was Thursday, Friday sort of thing. And it subsided. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be okay. We're starting this pulpit exchange, right? The next day I have to preach at this other church, and I got to go do that. And I think I'm going to be okay. But then that Saturday, right before, Sunday, obviously, that's how it works. But that Saturday, just a gout, it was so painful. I was limping around, I could barely move, and I'm thinking, this is so embarrassing. How am I gonna even get on stage? Well, this is ridiculous. And then I start to think, man, they already think you're goofy. You go limping around or trip or something, they're not gonna hear anything you have to say. Hey, you can't stand up to gout. What are you going to do? Man, just lies from the enemy. Now, look, I get it. I don't want us to take that too far because we can science this, right? I got to be an old fat guy pretty much on my own. There are consequences to choices. I understand all of that. I just think, how come on Saturday? Why has it got to be on Saturday? I think the same thing about snowstorms. It seems like every winter, I know this isn't true, but man, it seems like it snows Saturday night every time there's a snowstorm. What's going on? Look, those are goofy stories, but I suppose that you can think of stories in your life as well where the enemy will use any foothold he can find just to prop the door open. And to start whispering, you're going to limp on stage and look like a fool, and nobody will trust anything you say. Right? Just to start telling that lie. Just to have you peek through into that temptation. I don't know if you end up in a place like Mark chapter 5, but the hurt is big enough. The enemy's only goal is to destroy. That's truth number 2. Truth number 3 is that Jesus will never force himself on you. Well, let's take a look here as we continue on. The folks have gone and they see the situation. They see the man there. Verse 17, they see the man sitting next to Jesus in his right mind. He's put this man back. He's completely transformed him. And then we get verse 17, and they begin to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. I don't really know, other than they were so totally afraid. It was so outside the realm of what they thought was possible that this guy who nobody could control and nobody could understand was now sitting clothed in his right mind, maybe in the very cloak of Jesus. And they can't figure it out. And then they see all their pigs dead. Their livelihood, maybe they worked, this has sustained them for the year or whatever, gone. And they're so afraid that they say, Jesus, you've got to hit the road. I've heard this many times, but last few weeks ago I heard a preacher say that Jesus is a gentleman. He'll never force himself on you. And so when these folks say, you got to go, Jesus starts to get into the boat. But I just want to pause here to remind you that while Jesus will never force himself on you, he has an open invitation available to you. He is willing to open the door. If, he'll knock, and if you'll open, he wants to come in. I remember as a kid when I decided I need to really say yes to Jesus. I've got to get serious about this. I need to be baptized. And I was 14, 15 years old or whatever. I remember the service. I don't remember the sermon that was preached. I was sitting on the third row right-hand side because that's where my parents always sat in this little church. Third row right-hand side. And it was the kind of little church where at the end of the sermon, the preacher, no matter if he knew everybody in the audience by name, he probably did. And so he had a pretty good idea of their spiritual condition. No matter who was there, at the end of that message, he was offering an invitation. He'd say something like, we're going to stand up and we're going to sing this hymn. And when we sing this hymn, you can walk forward and say yes to Jesus and be baptized. And so he delivers this invitation. And I'm thinking, man, this is my time. They say, we're singing verses 1, 2, and 4. And I am trying to work up enough courage through verse 1, through verse 2. We sing verse 4 poorly. And in the middle, I decided I got to go. And so I walk what seemed like 26 miles, a marathon-length journey, over those 8 feet to the front row. And I sat down, and the preacher came down. He said, Lance, what are you doing? I said, well, I think I need to be baptized. And he said, are you sure? I said, what do you mean? Are you sure you want to be baptized today? I said, yeah, I think it needs to be today. He said, well, here's the truth. It was middle of February. It was freezing cold. He said, I forgot to turn on the heater to the baptistry. Water's going to be really cold. Are you sure it needs to be today? And I said, yes. It just completely went over my head that this poor guy did not want to get into the water with me. Right? I mean, we could have waited till Monday. It would have warmed up. But that 8 feet, 26-mile journey, I'd spent all my courage. We went in, and he baptized me, raised me up, and I shaken. And to this day, I'm not sure if that was the Holy Spirit or just, the temperature. Look, I get it. It's hard to say yes. It takes courage. But if you're here today and you've yet to say yes to Jesus, if you've never taken those 8 feet, those 26 miles worth of walk, today, it's really easy. You just have this welcome home card. There's a little box that says baptism at the bottom of that welcome home card. I just want you to mark that box. I'm going to talk to you this week. We're going to take those steps to say yes to Jesus. Jesus, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, he'll meet you where you are. He wants to grow you from there. He has this open invitation. He won't force himself on you, but he has this open invitation for you to join him. It's truth number 3. Truth number 4 is that you are exactly where Jesus needs you. So these townspeople come out, they ask Jesus to leave. Jesus starts to get into the boat. Verse 18, as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. This is another one of those decisions that Jesus makes, and you're like, what's going on? And he makes it because he's Jesus. But this guy wants to get in the boat and go with Jesus. And I can't blame him. I think maybe he wanted to get in the boat and go with Jesus because he was a little worried. If he gets too far away from Jesus, maybe those demons would come back. And so he wants to stay close to Jesus. Maybe he's just experienced this newness of life, this transformation that only Jesus can give to us and offer us. And he's like, I just want to be a part of that. And so he wants to stay and go with Jesus. And Jesus says, no, I want you to go back and tell your friends and family, the people in town, those folks who had chained you up and kicked you out of town and fired you from your job and kicked you out of your home. You go tell those folks how good God has been to you. You go tell them the mercy that God has shown you. That's exactly what the man did, by the way. We know this because when Jesus came back to this Gentile area, these 10 cities, he landed on that same beach, and not one crazy guy ran up to him, but just this hordes of people bringing their sick, wanting to get close to him. They found out about Jesus. Well, Jesus said, no, you got to go back and talk to your family. You're not coming with me. And I think it's because I think that man wanted to get into the boat so badly because he just wasn't convinced. He thought, these folks that kicked me out, these folks that chained me up, my family that abandoned me, will they really believe that I'm different? Will they really believe that I'm new? Will they really get that I'm transformed? And in his heart of hearts, I just think he was having trouble with that. And so Jesus, kind of maybe we describe this, I guess, as tough love. I don't know. He said, you go prove it. You go tell them the good things that God has done for you. You go tell them the mercy that he has shown you. And live like it. You show them. And this United as One movement has been so encouraging for me over the last, 5 years. It's been really great. And I truly believe there's one last step left in this United as One, this partnership with Leavenworth County churches. I think there's one step left. And I think that one step is sort of the unleashing of this army of missionaries in our community. I mean, you might be sitting there thinking, well, that sounds great for somebody else. You might be saying, I'm not trained, I'm not equipped. But this is what I would suggest you think about. Just consider if you have an answer to either one of these questions. What good has God done in your life? How has he shown you mercy? Because that was the equipping and transforming that was required for this man in Mark chapter 5 to go be a missionary to those 10 cities. And if you have an answer to those questions, if you understand, we hear some of that goodness, don't we? If you have an answer to the good things that God has done for you, if you have an answer for mercy that Jesus has shown you, then there is no excuse. There's no excuse for the people on our bowling teams, for the folks in the clubs we're involved with, for the coworkers we work with, for the people that live in the cul-de-sac where we live, to not know the difference that God has made in your life. For them to not know the goodness that he has shown you. The mercy that Jesus has demonstrated. And we have this story to share. And so would you take those Easter invites that are on your chair, just put them in your wallet, tuck them in your pocket, take them with you. I know that Jesus is going to bring folks into your life this week that you can share how he has demonstrated goodness in your life, how he has shown you mercy. And you can invite them to experience that as well. You can invite them to worship with you on Easter Sunday. You'll grab some of those Good Friday invitations that are on the tables in the foyer and the Next Step station. Invite them to that community service. Let them know how what God has done in your life and the mercy that he has shown you. A couple years ago, those NCAA wrestling championships were in Kansas City, and my son said, Dad, we ought to go to this. And so I said, okay, we got tickets, sort of. They were on the second to last row in the Sprint Center, whatever it's called now. And we were way up there. I mean, there was a row behind us, but hardly. Like, it was kind of row behind us where a chair is broken. They just let it be broken. Like, nobody's sitting there. And we were surrounded by Penn State fans. And Penn State fans are passionate wrestling fans. And anytime a Penn State wrestler got on the mat, man, I sat there and I was amazed because they just started cheering and yelling and shouting instructions to their wrestlers. And I thought a couple things. I thought, you goofballs. We are so far away. There's no way that wrestler can hear anything you say. And besides that, I mean, there's no higher level. Some of these guys were already Olympic medalists. You know, they are at the height of their talents here. They did not need your help. I was too big a coward to say out loud. And so I sat there as a non-participant. And I suppose that's okay. The next ball game you go to, the next sporting event you watch, the next concert you go to, you have my permission to sit back and be as non-participatory as you want. But in this thing, when we're walking with Jesus as one of his disciples, the spiritual battle that every one of us is a part of, this transformation that we are undergoing, it's not okay to be a non-participant. Man, he is asking and calling and begging you to get into the game. Jesus totally and completely transforms.